So this week I decided to become a social media influencer. And I looked around and I saw all the stuff that's out there on social media, and I thought, man, that's a pretty sweet gig. And so I looked into it and I decided that's what I was going to do this week. And first of all, it means that I have to create an online presence for myself, which I don't have one, but I got to do that. And so, and before I could have an online presence, I really have to have an image that people could really look at and see and know what they were being influenced by. And so I just took a picture of myself and started off with that. And so, and as you see, this is a picture of myself sitting at my kitchen table in my house. And you might think, most social media influencers are they look a little bit better than that. And you wouldn't hurt my feelings if you said that, but that might be what you say, and they look sharper and more glamorous. And you're right, they sure do. And so I asked my buddy AI, artificial intelligence, to help me become a social media influencer. And so I asked him, the picture's don't look very friendly. So I asked AI to make me a little friendlier. And so AI gave me a smile. I don't know where they got that smile from. Those are not my teeth. My teeth are crooked. Those are straight. And they gave me dimples, which I guess makes me friendlier. And they cleaned up my facial hair a little bit. They shaved me a little bit and smoothed away some of my flaws and wrinkles. And so that's what AI. But then I thought, an influencer has to have to be interesting. And sitting in the kitchen at my house, that's not very interesting. So what are people doing nowadays? And I thought, the really cool dads, they're taking their kids out to pumpkin patches and picking pumpkins, and they're doing all kinds of cool stuff. So I asked AI to help me to be a little more interesting. And this is what my buddy AI came up with. They put me in an amazing pumpkin patch, and let me tell you, those pumpkins were amazing. But then I got to looking at that and I thought, man, the smile looks a little creepy. And the picture, you can tell it's not really real. So I went back to my more serious picture and I asked AI just to smooth it over a little bit, make me look a little younger, and then put me in a more realistic setting. And this is what AI came up with. So I'm a little younger, a little smoother. I'm in the flower fields of South France, and let me tell you, southern France at this time of the year, it's amazing. And so I was able to pick flowers, and I thought, maybe this is the image. But then I'm like, no, I need to capture a little bit of the spirit of the season of baseball, of the American League Central, or American League Championship Series. And I thought, man, the way the Yankees are looking, they're going to be a fad. And so I said, AI, make me look like the Yankees, but with facial hair. And this is what AI did. And for those of you who don't know, the Yankees aren't allowed to grow beards. They can only have mustaches, and some of their guys look pretty ridiculous. And so AI, of course, made me look pretty ridiculous. That's what okay, so I know I'm being ridiculous this morning. It's a stupid illustration, but I really wanted to make a point. Like, you can see how ridiculous this is. I didn't go pumpkin picking. I don't have perfect teeth. I don't have dimples. I didn't go to the south of France. It's all made up. But we have the ability nowadays to craft whatever image we want. To do and to create a persona that we can't or couldn't before. But just because we can do something and make something doesn't make it true. So much of our life is built around appearances. How something or someone looks. It's often an indicator of what we think about them. And some of it's necessary. If I'm looking to buy a used car, I'm going to buy the car that looks better and not the one that has the bumper hanging off the back and the muffler dragging the ground. If I'm hiring somebody, I'm going to hire the person who shows up on time and who actually looks like they are prepared for the interview and want the job. But that picture we get, that surface level picture that we get, is not the whole picture of the person. And the problem we run into is when we think that the image we project or the things we do, what we show people, is the truth and the whole truth. I mean, there are tons of stories out there of social media influencers who are completely fake. Everything they do is made up, is not real. And these whole lives that they've crafted that look so good and great, like they're killing it, and like the world is the best, is a sham. But we can do the same kinds of things. We can create images of ourselves that we give to other people, that we show other people, that don't reflect reality at all. The problem that the Pharisees run into in our text this morning is that very thing. They have crafted a picture, an image of what it means to be righteous and a follower of God, but in the process of crafting that image, they really have left God out of the picture. And things get twisted. And it's a bad kind of twisted that leads people astray and away from the truth and into falsehood that will destroy them. You see, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law have a problem. They've observed the disciples, and they've observed that the disciples are breaking the tradition of the elders, this tradition that the elders have put in place, that they've made up of not washing their hands before they eat. Now, we all know that's important to wash your hands before you eat. We're taught that from an early age. It gets rid of germs, it keeps us healthy, and you have to do it for a certain amount of time, and it kills all the germs, all the harmful bacteria, and then you can eat, and you're healthy. And if if you're like me and have a hard time washing your hands long enough, your watch will tell you if you've done it long enough, and it tells you good job, and you're like, all right, I washed my hands good enough. But that's not the kind of hand washing that Jesus is talking about, or that the Pharisees are talking about. They're focused on aspects of ritual cleanliness and the rules and the regulations that religious leaders have put into place to make sure that people stay focused on honoring God. This tradition was built on the idea that there should be certain guardrails put in place to help direct people into honoring God. And that you could go through life and you could touch certain things, and those certain things would make you, were unclean, would make your hands unclean. And then when you touched the food became unclean. And then when you ate the food, it made your whole being unclean. And there was a whole list of things that if you touched, they would make you unclean. And so this was a way to try to avoid uncleanliness, to respect the holiness of God. And there were, I guess, originally good intentions behind it. The problem is the Pharisees look at the disciples. They see they aren't washing hands. And they basically say, why do your disciples not even care about the holiness of God? Based upon the fact that they didn't wash their hands. And rather than responding directly to the Pharisees and the teachers of the law with the answer that, of course, my disciples care about the things of God. Of course, I care about God's holiness. Instead of jumping on the defensive and answering that question, Jesus asks another question that's designed to get to the point. Why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition? In the question, Jesus points out where the Pharisees have gotten off a track. He wants them to see that this image that they've created actually stands in opposition to the wishes of God. Another tradition that they had instituted, apparently, was that a person could dedicate their resources to the temple, their money. And if a person did that, then they were really holy. They were doing a good, giving all your money to the temple, that's a great thing. Giving all your resources to the temple is a great thing. And they could get, attaboys for it. And they made a provision that they could do that even if it meant not caring for their parents. That they could be so serious in their pursuit of God and their dedication to God that they could forget about their responsibilities, God-given responsibilities to care for their parents, to honor their father and their mother, which was a God-given command. And so to give the temple would make everyone think they were awesome while their mother and father suffered, when actually God wants them to take care of their parents. And so it's a way to get around even the command of God. So in the name of glorifying God and special giving, they actually disrespect God by not doing what he wants them to do. And that's a weird, convoluted thing. And they've tightened these traditions so tight that it takes away from anyone actually walking in godly obedience. Now, the point of the passage, it's not about washing hands. It's not about giving of tithes and offerings. It's not about honoring fathers and mothers. Those are all parts and pieces of it, but that's not the point. The whole point is found in verse 8. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And that's what Jesus is trying to highlight. You see, the Pharisees have let externals take over, the forms of religion take over, to the point that they go through the motions because they are convinced that these things, the forms, the externals, they're the point. And they've missed the real point. Their hearts are so far, far away. If you are a believer, if you're a Christian, you can be the most Christian-y Christian in all of Christendom and be dead. I think that's one of the most pervasive lies and damage of the culture wars. It convinced whole swaths of people that if you followed certain patterns of culture, then you were a Christian. And if you didn't, then you weren't. And I think it's still a part of how we think in public. And it's wrong. D.A. Carson says this of this passage. He says, true religion must deal with the nature of man and not with externals. And that's the whole point, because the externals, they distract us from that. Because we think that we might be doing something or gaining ground or being better and they distract us from the whole point of dealing with ourself. So if I deal with my image, if I put all my energy in making myself look good and doing all the right things, and 100% of my energy is that, I don't ever have to turn that to the heart, to an inward focus. And sometimes I can get away with that. Most of the time you won't. At some point that breaks down. In Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis points out something pretty good, and it's a longer quote, so bear with me. He says this: one of the dangers, and this is not about money, but he starts off with a point about money. He said, one of the dangers of having a lot of money is that you may be quite satisfied with the kind of happiness money can give, and so fail to realize your need for God. If everything seems to come simply by signing checks, you may forget that you are at every moment totally dependent upon God. Natural gifts carry with them a similar danger. If you have sound nerves and intelligence and health and popularity and a good upbringing, you are likely to be quite satisfied with your character as it is. Why drag God into it, you may ask? A certain level of good conduct comes fairly easily to you. You are not one of those wretched creatures who are always being tripped up by sex or dipsomania or nervousness or bad temper. Everyone says you are a nice chap, and between ourselves you agree with them. You are quite likely to believe that all this niceness is your own doing, and you may easily not feel the need for any better kind of goodness. Often people who have all these natural kinds of goodness cannot be brought to recognize their need for Christ at all until one day the natural goodness lets them down and their self-satisfaction is shattered. In other words, it is hard for those who are rich in this sense to enter the kingdom. And the external stuff, the forms of religion that the Pharisees bring up, the washing of hands, those things distract us from our need, our utter dependency upon God. They make us think that the power is in ourselves and not outside of ourselves. And it's foolishness. See, Christ didn't come to make us look better. That's a side result. That happens. But he didn't come to make us look better. He came to make us and to transform us into a new creation. A different kind of being, if you will. He came to completely change us into different men and different women. He came to make us into a new creation that's completely different from before. Ezekiel 36, talking of a future time, talking of the time that happened when Christ came, he said, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. See, the externals, the keeping of laws comes from that new spirit and that new heart. Hebrews 8 expounds on this. The writer of Hebrews says this in verses 7 through 12. For if there had been nothing wrong with the first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. But God found fault with the people and said, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they did not remain faithful to my covenant, and I turned away from them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will establish with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. And this is something completely unattainable in our own power. This is a gift that God gives us that is free to us. We don't control it. It has nothing to do with our ancestry or our merit or how much we wash our hands or take care of our... It has nothing to do with that. We cannot work hard enough for it. And the sooner we get that straight in our minds, the better. It is given. And anyone can accept it. And anyone can be transformed by it at any time. I think the most powerful example in my mind in the Bible is that of Paul. On his way to Damascus to kill Christians, to arrest Christians, and he encounters Jesus on that road, and it utterly obliterates what he was doing. It changes his life. And he can say later that all the things that he once was, that they mean nothing. All the things he did, all the advancements that he had made, all the good things he had done, they have no weight compared to what has happened in his life and who he is now. You could be sitting here today in the midst of the worst kind of things. Your life could be falling apart, either because you've been tearing it down yourself or because others have been tearing it down. But when you encounter Jesus, something happens. Something different begins to happen. He begins to change you, and it's freeing and it's transformative. He doesn't just change the outward stuff. He makes us new from inside. And that newness begins to work itself out. And that process is lifelong. What Sarah said earlier, Romans 12, that's a lifelong process that we don't reach the end of this side of the grave. It's the process that begins now, but it goes on into eternity, into glory. And for some of us, that work is a little harder than for others. And it takes longer. But if we get things twisted up, then we run into a real problem. If we take that outside-in mentality like the Pharisees, instead of the inside-out mentality, then it can mess us up. Jesus actually has strong words about that in this passage in verses 13 and 14. He says, leave the blind guides. They're leading you to a pit of destruction. Leave them behind. It's dangerous. You see, the worst thing we can do is convince ourselves that we don't need Christ for this process to think, to finish and to complete, to think that we can do it all by modifying the externals. If we do X, Y, and Z, then we will be good. We can be holy enough and righteous enough, and pretty soon the rules become the point, and we forget about God. We forget about the gift of mercy and grace that He gave us. We forget that our inability to do it ourselves, our rebelliousness, cost an enormous amount. We forget it cost His crucifixion. And when we focus on the externals, that we put that further and further and further from our minds, and we lose our dependence upon Him. In Acts, we read that hundreds and hundreds are added to the number of believers each and every day. And there's this amazing picture of things happening, that God begins to capture the hearts and minds of the people who are in Jerusalem, and it begins to spread out. And people are caught up in the joy of the Lord, and it takes them all over the place into crazy circumstances, into risk and abandonment to God. They give themselves over to Him, and all the other stuff just falls to the wayside. And that's vital for us if we're going to be alive, if we're going to be vital. And only Jesus gets at that. So what's the practical point of all this? I'll leave you with three. First, and I can't say this enough, only Jesus saves. Only He can change us. If we aren't pursuing Him, then we will never find that change. If you're here this morning, if you've never turned to Him, never cried out your need for Him, never turned to Him as Lord, I encourage you to do that today. Let Him begin to work. And follow Him where He leads you. Second, this is a kind of hard one in our culture. Are you in community with people? Have you created an image that looks good on the surface, that you can throw on Sunday morning and be here with all of us? Have you created this image that keeps people out? Or do you allow people to see you? Really see you? Where they can call you on your stuff. Where they can see the stuff that's coming out of your heart. Where they can encourage and challenge. Jeff Vanderstelt, a pastor, used to be in Tacoma, Washington. wrote a book on discipleship called Saturate, and in it he says that one of the most important aspects of discipleship is close Christian community. He says we have to be close enough in community to be able to see each other, not in the ways that we want people to see us, not just in the surface level, but at a deeper level, to see us in a way that points out what is happening in our hearts and then challenges and encourages and pushes us towards Christ. And that we have to have people in our life that sees us and they don't run away. They still love us, but they also don't ignore the bad bits. He writes, when people live in proximity to one another, when they are around one another consistently, the heart begins to overflow, and our internal heart rebellion against God shows up. It's in there, but it's often never seen. This is when the best discipleship begins to take place. This is what Jesus did with his disciples. He didn't just put info in, he drew the heart out. He let the facade fall away so the brokenness could be seen. Our brokenness is there. It pushes us to the feet of Jesus. And when we are a community formed by that, by grace and mercy, we can look at each other's brokenness and not be shocked, not run away, but push each other to Jesus. The third point. It's related to the second. There are people who hear a message like this and say, this is why I don't go to church. That's the external stuff. Those are the forms of religion. I don't go to church. I don't give. I don't do any. I don't pray. I don't read. Because that's just the forms. God knows my heart. So that's the challenge, or that can happen. And there is a danger in thinking just because you go to church or give money or whatever, that you're all good. You can get caught up in those externals. But there's a huge danger in thinking that you don't need those practices or those forms to help draw you closer to God. One of my biggest worries about having this reading plan that we're going through this year was that people would read it just so they could say they've read it. Just to do it, just to check the box, to mark the box. A few years ago, that kind of thing happened to me. I was reading a pretty intense reading plan for the year, and as the weeks went by, I realized that I was just reading just with the goal to get through the reading plan. Each day I would sit there with my little thing and I would check the boxes. I read this, I read this, I read this, I read this. Great, I did a great job today, I'm good. And I realized in the middle of that man, I was making the point of my time in the morning to read that thing and not to encounter the holy living God. And I stopped reading the plan. I didn't stop reading the Bible, I just stopped that plan and I slowed down. And I said, Lord, help me to encounter you in these words and these pages that are so full of who you are. So whatever you do, whether you go to church, whether you read the Bible, whether you pray, whatever forms you follow, remember the point. It's to encounter Jesus, to rely upon him. Your encounter with him is the point. Period. Let's pray. Lord, help us to do this. Help us to practice this. It's so easy to get caught up in want to be faithful where we just kind of check off boxes and we put things in place that tighten and restrict others. But help us just to see you and to encounter you. Help us to understand how we can use these gifts that you've given us, church, our community of Christian brothers and sisters, our prayer, the reading of your word. Lord, help us to realize those things are all good gifts that you've given us to draw us to you. Roads to you, not as destinations in and of themselves. Help us not to forget that. Lord, I praise you. I thank you for all that you do and all that you've done, all that you will do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.